All right, Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
For the Democratic Party, you know you've really messed up when even CNN is calling you out for hypocrisy. And that is exactly what happened on a recent CNN panel where every guest and the host blasted Dems for propping up Stop the Steal candidates to the tune of millions of dollars, while at the same time declaring that preserving democracy is a sacred duty that should be beyond politics. Take a listen.
It's like, okay, you've got this political message about our democracy and about what's important. Propping up these kinds of candidates like a Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania or a Carrie Lake potentially in Arizona, that is contrary to everything else that you are telling the American people about where you stand and what you believe and what's important. And if we end up, if it ends up that some of these extreme candidates that they've propped up get elected and actually do make moves in 2024 that jeopardize our presidential election process, like they're going to have to answer for that.
Yeah, it's not just contrary. It undercuts the whole argument.
It does.
Yeah. I mean, when Democrats tell you that the greatest threat to democracy is Donald Trump-like candidates and that the very fate of our republic rests on defeating them, and at the same time they're bolstering them for partisan advantage in a tight race, the first argument, both arguments can't be true.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's you see why they're doing it, and you see their obvious strategic advantages and tactical advantages.
They're more likely to win an election if they do
it'll
it.
probably work in most cases, but there is that.
But it might not. That's the difference.
And it's not just because some of our moms are listening, but in the back of my head, I always hear like, "Be careful what you wish for."
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's just the little thing that I just keep hearing on these arguments.
Right. And look, very
I mean,
clear.
they wished to run against Donald Trump.
Right, they do. And see what happened.
2016, look,
and they lost. And you can win again. It's certainly possible. This year's midterm is so critical.
The gobsmacked panelists here are 100% correct. You can't take up massive congressional resources diving into the details of what happened on January 6th, solemnly vowing you will do whatever it takes to protect democracy from conspiracy-addled insurrectionists, and then turn right around and spend millions ushering a gaggle of those conspiracy-addled insurrectionists through their primary contests. Let me give you some of the numbers surrounding the strategy because it is really astounding. In Maryland, Democrats spent $1.2 million on ads persuading conservative voters that gubernatorial candidate Dan Cox was the most conservative candidate. According to Vox, that was more than what Cox and the other GOP candidates spent combined in the primary. He ultimately prevailed. Current Republican Governor Larry Hogan says Dems are playing with fire and that he himself will not vote for his party's nominee. In Illinois, Democrats spent an eye-watering $35 million propping up State Senator Darren Bailey. He's a Trump-backed candidate who once pushed to kick Chicago out of the state altogether. Bailey also prevailed in his primary. Now, Maryland and Illinois, they're both generally blue states, so Democrats will be favored to prevail in both of those races in the fall. But Democrats have also meddled in races in hotly contested swing states where the national mood could easily sweep a Republican, no matter how fringe, into office. As we've covered before, Dems backed Stop the Steal true believer Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, buying more ads to back him than the campaign did itself. And they are now flirting with another Trump-backed election denier in Arizona. Carrie Lake has been leading in the GOP primary polls for governor and has leaned into every election conspiracy, outright declaring she would not have certified the results if she had been governor in 2020. Dems have been helping Lake prevail by highlighting her opponent's past donations to Democrats, and the very latest poll of the race has Lake up in the primary by 12. And new reporting by Axios reveals that Democrats are working to unseat one of Trump's few remaining GOP critics in the House. They are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in a GOP primary on behalf of a Trump-backed far-right candidate. That candidate is looking to defeat incumbent Peter Meijer, who voted for Trump's impeachment after January 6th. Let me just repeat that. Democrats are trying to oust in a primary one of the few Republicans who voted to impeach Trump for his actions on January 6th. All in all, according to an Open Secrets analysis, Democrats have spent at least $44 million propping up extreme candidates in Republican primaries. In their article for Open Secrets, they point out that these candidates ultimately winning is not the only danger. Elevating extremists backing conspiracy nonsense who are hostile to democracy helps to mainstream and legitimize those views, even if the candidates do not ultimately prevail. Some of these candidates, though, are pretty likely to prevail. There's a long history, of course, of political parties playing in the opposite team's primary. The most storied recent example is Claire McCaskill, former Missouri senator, helping Todd legitimate rape Aiken to victory. Now, Aiken's ascent to the GOP nomination, that helped McCaskill win another term against all the odds. And although now even McCaskill is wary of the Dem strategy and skeptical it's going to actually work, given how stiff the national winds are blowing against the Democratic Party. I was not familiar with a more historic Dem meddling, which ended up massively and spectacularly backfiring. As the Washington Examiner writes, in the California gubernatorial race back in 1966, Democrats worried that the moderate Republican mayor of San Francisco, a guy named George Christopher, would be a formidable challenge for them in the general election. So they dug up an old milk price fixing scandal and leaked it to a friendly columnist. This actually kneecapped Christopher's chances. So instead of Christopher, Dems got their political wish and faced off in the general against a hard-right political neophyte named Ronald Reagan. Reagan, of course, went on to not only romp in the general, but ultimately to remake the entire Republican Party and the nation, destroying the New Deal order. Way to go, guys. Now, the current Dem strategy might work out for him, might hand him some governor mansions in key states. Given Biden's record low approval ratings and the dire state of the economy, though, it could also easily backfire, stacking those very same governor's mansions with candidates who have outright said they would trigger a constitutional crisis if they were given the opportunity. One thing is absolutely clear. When Democrats inveigh about the threats to democracy and existential stakes, they do not actually mean it. They're still playing their games. They're still only concerned first with servicing their donors and second with winning so long as it doesn't interfere with the donor servicing. They're telling you these aren't normal times, but they are approaching politics as if they are completely normal times. That's why, even though I do think the January 6th hearings have done some damage to Trump and the GOP, the most important thing Democrats could do right now, if they actually consider the Republican threat to be existential, is to try to win. And you do that by relentlessly focusing on the economic concerns that voters have routinely told you they care the most about. If the future of democracy depends on this nation, then act like it. Buck your donors, deliver for voters, and stop putting lunatic psychos in position to win. The latest example is really something. Hundreds of cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.